Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Bizible Essentials for Marketo Users. My name is Sarah, and I'm on the content team at Perkuto, and I'll be moderating our time together today. Just a few housekeeping notes and reminders. Everyone is in listen-only mode. However, you may use your chat box to communicate with us as well as submit questions at any time during this presentation. We will have a roundtable question and answer period at the end of the webinar with representatives from Bizible and Marketo joining us. You'll also find additional attribution resources on our website, learn.perkuto.com/attribution, including an in-depth comparison of Revenue Explorer and Bizible. Additionally, you may also subscribe to our blog to receive future posts and content updates. Lastly, we will send out an email with a link to download slides and view the on-demand version of this presentation, should you wish to share it with your colleagues. If you are not familiar with Perkuto, we help marketing leaders who feel frustrated with not having a bigger impact on revenue. As a Marketo Platinum partner, our team of experienced consultants create impactful strategies, optimize marketing operations, simplify MarTech, and execute on day-to-day campaigns. Today, of course, we'll be talking about attribution and the attribution tools within Marketo. Analyzing the effectiveness of marketing campaigns is a challenge to many marketers, from identifying top-performing channels in marketing efforts to proving contribution to revenue. To illustrate, and as a fun start to our time today, we share with you the metrics from our own registration marketing for this webinar. This is a report many marketers would love to have. Here you see registrants by channel, with email doing quite well. With Marketo and Revenue Explorer, this report would entail about 50 programs per initiative to track our channels and sub-channels, but with Bizible, it required no special effort and was easily built in Salesforce. This is also the perfect lead-in to our agenda for today. In just a minute, we'll turn the presentation over to Brandon Isom, Director of Marketing and Analytics at TIBCO, who will be sharing his company's marketing challenges and how they solve their attribution dilemma. After Brandon's presentation, we'll hear from Justin Norris, a Marketo Certified Solutions Architect, 4-time Marketo Champion, and the Director of Solutions Architecture at Perkuto. Justin, from his many years of consulting and working with operations teams of all sizes and industries, will talk us through the differences between Revenue Explorer and the newest member of the Marketo family, Bizible, as well as the impact on your operations. Lastly, we'll close our time with a Q&A period with representatives from Bizible and Marketo joining Brandon and Justin. Brandon, Justin, thank you both for joining us today. We have a full agenda, so let's jump right in. And Brandon, we'll let you take it away.
Thank you. So before I begin, I think it's important for everyone on the call to understand just exactly who TIBCO is and what we do. So I'll start with that before I actually jump into the agenda. So TIBCO is a software company. We've been in business for over 20 years. We're headquartered in Palo Alto. It's also where I'm based. We have over 10,000 customers, a few you'll see at the bottom of the slide, and we have over 3,500 employees dispersed globally. In a nutshell, TIBCO really does two things. We sell integration software, and in particular, there's a couple of industries that we focus on. Energy, in particular, oil and gas, financial services, telecom, and retail are just a few. What we try to do is focus on industries where there are a bunch of disparate systems and a lot of data that need to be brought together in real time to make business decisions. So that's what our integration software enables companies to do. In addition to that, what we also do is we also have analytics software. And one of our primary tools there is Spotfire, which competes with the likes of Tableau and Click. So we really focus on those two areas of business and enabling our customers to not only bring information together, but to glean insight and make key decisions. So today what I'm going to do is really talk to you about TIBCO's digital transformation strategy. It's something we've been working on for, just over 2 years, 2.5 years or so. And And I'm going to focus really in three areas. I'm going to talk about where we started. Then I'm also going to talk about how Bizible helped us really reach the next level and continue to move the ball down the field. And finally, talk about how we're actually proactively managing our business today using a tool like Bizible. And the intent here is really to hope that everyone on this call can find some similarities in your own journey and understand how a tool like Bizible can really help you accelerate your momentum as you make your own transformation. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, I've been in this role about 3 years, and when I came in, it was just a hot mess, to be very honest with you. We had 10 instances of Salesforce, 8 instances of Marketo, and they all kind of operated in a silo. So trying to really glean insight and understand what was actually happening in the business was extremely hard and took a mammoth amount of just sheer willpower to pull together. In addition, TIBCO at the time, our marketing organization just was not looked at as a necessary, organization within the business. We were a very sales-led organization. What sales really expected from marketing at the time was really for us to just focus on physical events, and that was really about it. And so when I came into this role, the goal was always to make sure that we transformed not only our marketing department into a data-driven organization, but really try and bring the entire company along with us. And it's been a journey with ups and downs, but I would say overall it's been fairly successful. And so this is what I kind of want to share with everybody today. Next slide, please. What we did in the beginning is we spent about 6 months really pulling together a single source of truth, establishing KPIs, and really making folks accountable for the business and the business that they were responsible for. And so for us, once we got that single source of truth and we set up a cadence and made folks be able to speak to their business and what was going right and what was going wrong, we really wanted to focus in 2 areas. One was making sure that we focus on accessibility of the data, using our own tool, using Spotfire to make sure that folks had access to the dashboards they could self-serve and really be able to understand their business. The second was really around training, making sure everybody understood the processes, making sure that they knew how to use the dashboards, how to track their campaigns, track contribution, all that kind of stuff. And we did that for about 6 months, and it was a really good step in the right direction. But as we made people more responsible for their business, they started to ask more complex questions, and as an organization, we kind of plateaued. And what I mean by that is we couldn't really answer those complex questions that they had. As they wanted to double click into their business, we just did not have the insight or the data to be able to answer the questions and really provide insight on the direction we should be going. As an example, we didn't have any visibility to our digital channels and how they were performing. We didn't have landing page tracking. We didn't have goals set up on them. And there was just an increased amount of frustration from our own marketing teams because they felt that their full contribution was not being really shown. And so we knew we needed to absolutely get in front of that. And so next slide, please. And so what we needed to do is take stock of what we were actually missing. And there were a few key things that we needed outside of the frustrations we were hearing. We knew we needed a complete view of the lead life cycle, from the very first touch all the way through, an opportunity being closed won. We really needed a 360 view of an account. And in particular, we really needed to understand our paid media business and how effective or non-effective our spend was. These things were the things that would enable us to get the kind of insight that would help us make key business decisions and be able to really control the narrative as we move forward. Next slide, please. So in the summer of last year, maybe just a little bit before that, we had to make a decision around exactly what we wanted to do to solve some of these challenges. And we looked at Marketo, we looked at Bizible, we looked at some other vendors, and based on our own technology roadmap, we found that Bizible was going to be the easiest for us to not only implement, but to hit the ground running and be able to make sure that we could build our technology stack around. And Bizible really enabled us to have the flexibility to do some of these things, okay? At TIBCO, we have hundreds of products, and we have multiple channels. And we really had no insight into how all of those channels and products played together and what we should be focusing on, or just really understanding how that business really worked. And so for us, Bizible gave us a few things right off the bat. One is it really enabled our digital marketing team to really understand how leads and pipeline were created by keywords. And it enabled them to really create a lever that we hadn't had before, which really was giving marketing the ability to optimize to the best performing keywords and drive to the best ROI. Before that, it was kind of a shot in the dark or sort of a best guess. And with Bizible coming into play, we actually had quantitative data that we could rely on that would help us make these decisions. And really for us, it was, there were a number of things that Bizible gave us, but in particular, it was a huge paradigm shift in our marketing team. We had built some momentum when we had built the single source of truth, and we were continuing to build on that momentum by building out, visibility and insight around how we were spending a huge portion of our budget. And this was something that really has continued to resonate with us. And I'll talk about a couple of things that we did here. Next slide. So the first thing, and I mentioned this was one of the things that I talked about was missing, having a 360 view of an account. Now, for us, one of the key things that we were really struggling with, and we're not great at it today, but we're much better than we were even a year ago, is just how marketing and sales interact with each other. We had a very adversarial relationship with our sales department, and it made no sense because we're on the same team. And one of the frustrations that really came out as we look back is that we just were not speaking the same language as sales. We were talking about MQLs and marketing originated or marketing influence bookings. And while that was somewhat important to them, it was not what they really cared about. They cared about how to figure out how to go into an account, how to speak to that account, how to get new logos, how to retain existing customers, these sorts of things. And one of the things we realized early on is that their view of what marketing was doing and our view, we were on two different planes. And we were trying to figure out how to bridge that gap. So what we initially did is we took the top 5 accounts that our sales leaders cared about, and we asked them to go out and say, how many marketing interactions do you think we've had over the past, 6 months to 9 months with these 5 accounts? And when they came back to us, they showed us basically all the opportunities that were created on these 5 accounts. And it was maybe, 3 to 4 opportunities, over that time period. And that's all they saw. And we realized right there, that was the key. We needed to be able to show them all of the interactions and all the touch points that the marketing team was having on these accounts. And when we actually showed them that compared to what they saw, it was like their jaw hit the floor, apologies. And what happened there is that it really opened our sales team up to really want to collaborate with us, because once we showed them a view of an account similar to what you're seeing right now, it really made them ask more questions. It made them want to ask, like, well, what kind of content are they consuming? What personas are coming to us? What kind of campaigns are driving them? How much pipeline? How many leads? What's the conversion rate on? They really started. It was the bridge that helped them come over to where we were and look at the things that we were measuring, and vice versa. So this 360 view of an account is something that was really, really critical in us being able to be a more collaborative partner with our sales team. And one interesting thing, one sidebar here that I thought was really interesting about Bizible. Bizible is really good because in the back end, once it's deployed into Salesforce, it actually has a lead to account mapping on the back end. And that's something that is really difficult to do if anybody's ever tried to do that. And so, having that information and being able to leverage that is something that you can absolutely leverage to really collaborate much closer with your sales team. Next slide, please. The other thing that was really cool about Bizible, and it was something that we knew we had to tackle because of the increased amount of frustration and folks saying that, hey, you're not counting all of our contribution, is multi-touch. We know, right, that multiple campaigns touch a lead throughout the life cycle, right? And being able to see that and understand that is something that most marketing departments are going to need to do. For us, the great thing about Bizible, and one of the key selling points for us, is that they have out-of-the-box solutions here. They have multiple models that you can use that just come directly out of the box. And we used a couple of those to start. We started with the U shape, then we moved to W. And as we gained information and understood insight, it really helped us map out where we needed to go. And ultimately, where we landed is that we needed to create a custom model. And that was something that was really, really simple to do with Bizible. It took us, I think, about 3 days to work with their sales support team to kind of get that in place. And once it was in place, it was just up and running, and we continue to use it today, and we tweak it. So, having having an out-of-the-box multi-touch model, as well as being able to customize it based on your own business, is something that is super invaluable and something that was a key selling point for us. Next slide, please. The other thing that it's really been able to help us do is really take a look at our budget and redistribute it in real time. If we see something is not working well, we will absolutely divert funds and move it into something that we see is working very well. And again, as I talk about those levers that our digital marketing team has now, this is one of them. In particular, one of the things that we've been able to do over the last couple of years, which could not have even been thought of prior to that, is we get incremental funding. Before that, it was hard for before we implemented Bizible, it was really hard for us to make a case that we should get any additional funds because we couldn't really tell you what the ROI was going to be. Today, we're first at the table when those funds are even being mentioned, because if we know that, there's X amount of dollars available, we can give you Y return. And not only that, but we can track that in real time, and we can move things again from things that aren't performing as well to things that are performing better. And so for us, having that lever and having the ability to be at the table ready to go when that funding comes available is something that we are just in a position to win on now. So it's been really great being able to use a tool like Bizible to help us really navigate that and really, get out of the gut feeling, oh, we think we can do this, or, it might return something. We can see exactly what it's returning for all those dollars that we invest. Next slide, please. Finally, one of the things that we've also been able to do is really take a look at our strategy and been able to use Bizible to really drive towards that. In particular, we have 3 prongs of our strategy this year, right? It's to grow new logos, right? Increase subscription and increase digital marketing contribution. Around the first 2, growing new logos and increasing subscription, what Bizible enables us to do is really understand which channels are not only bringing in qualified leads, but which of those leads are creating pipeline and being moved to close won. So for us, again, being able to really drive this narrative, drive this conversation is something that has really repositioned marketing from where we were 2 years ago, when we were just looked at as, somebody who just executed based on what sales was asking us to do, to being a trusted partner within our own organization. Lastly, the increased digital marketing contribution, this goal is somewhat tactical, to be honest, but we have a lot of challenges with it. One of the main metrics we look at is something called marketing influence bookings. And it's really dependent on the sales team, attaching a contact to an opportunity so that all that information flows over in Salesforce. And what we find more often than not is that just doesn't happen. The great thing about Bizible is something so tactical as that is literally made like seamless. What we can do today with Bizible is no matter if they're interacting with an ad or there's an actual Salesforce campaign, even if the sales team doesn't attach it to an opportunity, we can see all of that. And we can make a case that that should be marketing influence. Again, it's something that has really enabled us to get our arms around the business, really understand our metrics, and really be able to drive exactly where we want to go and where we believe the organization is best positioned to win. So for us, Bizible has been a key tool to really help us in all 3 phases, or excuse me, at least 2 of the 3 phases, once we were ready to kind of get all that in place, right? It's been something that we continue to use and something that really helps us manage our budget and the things that we're investing in a much more efficient way than we would have ever been able to do without it. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. Thanks for sharing. I think many marketers can relate to your story, particularly with proving the value of marketing and connecting sales to marketing activity. And it certainly sounds like you've made a lot of progress in a year. So great job. Let's take a moment now and get a quick poll on from our audience on insight on what you all are using in your attribution efforts. We're asking you, which tools are you currently using to track attribution, with possible answers: Excel spreadsheets, Marketo, Revenue Explorer, ARB, Bizible, other attribution software, or nothing. I need help. So let me launch this poll. And if you would all please take a moment. Submit your responses. Okay. Looks like everyone has voted, so we're going to close this. And here we have the results. Looks like 14% using Excel spreadsheets, 32% using Marketo Revenue Explorer, 25% using Bizible, 14% on other software, and 16% using nothing at all. What do you think, Justin? Are you surprised by the results?
I think it's an interesting breakdown. I'm actually surprised, not unpleasantly surprised, to see about a quarter of people already using Bizible, so that's good. And they'll have some familiarity already with some of the things that we're going to talk about, and we can go into it a bit deeper. And I'm also happy to see that we had about a third of the group today using Marketo's existing pre-Bizible attribution tools, because I think that is also a core audience that has a need to kind of learn about some of these differences. So that's sort of what I'm hoping to go into today. Attribution is a problem that's been interesting to me for a while. I've been working on it for a number of years, both using Marketo attribution tools and Revenue Explorer and Bizible, and some of the other tools that are out there on the market. And I think one of the main issues is that everyone wants to arrive, at the amazing reports, and obviously that's the destination that we need to get to in this journey, like some of those incredible dashboards that Brandon shared. But not everyone has a clear idea of what's involved in actually getting there under the hood, particularly for those folks on this call that are using Marketo today and that are used to doing things in a particular way to supply the needs of Marketo's structure and how it functions. If you're considering a switch to a tool like Bizible, there's some changes, and there's some things kind of even in your day-to-day operations that need to be different. So before we dive into that, I just wanted to establish some kind of foundational concepts, some ways that that we use to think about attribution. So we're all looking at this in the same way. Actually, sorry, I'll just talk to that other slide first. If we go back one. There's three related data sets that we kind of have to look at when it comes to attribution. Your marketing efforts, which is all the stuff that you did. So you're doing all of these things. You've got audience engagement, so people are interacting with your marketing efforts in various ways, clicking on your emails, filling out your forms, attending your events, whatever. And then you've got the performance outcomes, things that you care about, your MQLs, your opportunity pipeline, or ideally your close-won deals and your revenue. So it's where these three things come together that we can really start talking about attribution, which is giving credit for those outcomes back to your marketing efforts based on the things that the audience did who participated in both. So if somebody attended your event and then was part of a deal that closed, we say, great, that event gets some credit for that outcome based on that engagement. And so that, at a high level is how all of these tools work, all these models, whether simple or complex. They all are sort of flavors of this kind of thinking. Now, all tools, we'll go to the next slide to look at that, all these tools kind of do three things along the way with this sort of data to get there. The first thing we have to do is capture data. So people are interacting with your stuff. We need to capture that. Even the initiatives that you're doing, we need to log that somewhere. The outcomes that you're having, we need to log that. These are table stakes, and there are varying levels of challenge in capturing all that data. So, your outcomes, we usually see that in the opportunities that typically live in your CRM system. The stuff that you're doing, you might be creating that as campaigns or as programs. And then the engagement, which is typically where marketing automation plays a big role. What are people engaging with? So getting all that into your system in the first place. Then the second thing they need to do is modeling that data. So how is that data stored? Is it all just captured in a field on a person record or a lead record? Is it separated out into different programs? Is it stored in a separate custom object? Is it just a stream of activities in your activity log? So the way that data is stored is very critical because in the absence of a BI developer sitting next to you at the office, and if you're lucky enough to have one, then I salute you. But if you don't, then your ability to report on this data is in many ways determined by how you're storing it in the first place. So it's coming into the system, you're storing it in a particular way in relation to each other, and then of course the fun part, the part that everybody wants to get to, visualizing that data. How do we actually slice it and dice it and mix it together and ultimately gain insight out of it to help drive better business decisions, like the sort of thing that Brandon was talking about, reallocating funds, prioritizing high-performing channels, doubling down on best bets, killing things that aren't working. Essentially having a data-driven marketing organization, the place that we all want to get to. So these are the three axes, if you will, or the three areas of comparison that we're going to dive into, mainly the first two, especially in some depth, between Bizible and Marketo. Now, there's one other concept that I want to establish on the next slide, which is that the marketing efforts, the stuff that you're doing, they kind of come in different flavors. And I think that these different types of marketing and efforts are not always well enough distinguished. People blend them together in their thinking in a lot of cases, and this can lead to ambiguity and a lack of clarity in terms of how we actually understand the success of our marketing efforts. So I want to introduce these concepts here in case they're not already sort of part of your mental model. Then we all have them as part of our lexicon. And I should note that the way that I'm using these terms here is indebted to some work that Josh Hill has done, person in the Marketo community that some of you no doubt have seen before, as he's quite active there. So obviously all of this centers around your customer, who is the fellow that you see here in the middle of the slide on the train. Let's see, he's a customer for your black turtleneck business that you have. How we interact with those customers can come with, in different forms. So we have channels, and the way we might think of channels is they're things that bring people somewhere. So in this visual analogy represented by the train. So paid advertising is a channel. Email in this context is a channel. Organic search, somebody typing something into Google. Anything that brings somebody into an interaction with you. Social media is another example, is a channel. The places that they're going to, the things that they're actually engaging with when they get there, in this case represented by the platform, or the place that this person's arriving at, that's your offer. So if we look at this interaction that we're having right here in that chart that Sarah showed you at the beginning of the webinar, this webinar for Perkuto is an offer. But you had to get there somehow. And as we saw in many cases, it was through emails that were sent out, some marketing that our partners did, some of the chatter on social media that we had. So seeing that together helps illustrate how all of that marketing works in unison, essentially. And if we split it out and don't have that relationship modeled, then we have a much greater challenge in answering those sorts of questions. What you see on the slide right now is more of a tangible kind of nuts and bolts diagram of how this might work in real life. Now, this is a more traditional model, and we'll dive into this, where you've got your channel and offer programs split out separately. But this is how that system, all those three data sets and all those three components might work together in Marketo in terms of capturing data from all these different sources, bringing it into the system, modeling it across different programs, and then finally analyzing it in Revenue Explorer. Let's go to the next slide now and look at these three different components that I mentioned of an attribution tool, namely capturing data, modeling data, and visualizing data. And we'll compare and contrast from, let's call it, the traditional Marketo way of doing it for the third of you, maybe more in the room today, that's your current reality. What changes from that versus trying to do this with Bizible? And to kind of make it a bit more realistic and concrete, we're just going to pose a hypothetical scenario for each of those three functions and look at how the tools differ. So let's start with data capture. And the scenario here is you want to understand what marketing initiatives are bringing people into your database. Very common one, right? Lead source. Anybody who's used Google Analytics is kind of used to this concept. And I don't know about you, but when I first had a Marketo instance of my own and opened it up, I was looking at this field, lead source, and I was expecting it. Now it's called person source, of course, but I was expecting it to be populated with something. And it was very confusing to me that there was no data automatically going into this field. So the field is there, but it's up to us in Marketo to populate that. And that's certainly doable. If we go to the next slide, we can talk about how. And I've seen everything from people, just using a lead source of Marketo or website, which is, I would say, is not tremendously helpful because number one, Marketo doesn't actually bring you any leads in and of itself. Marketo is a tool. It does a lot of really important things to the records that enter it, and it enables you to do a lot of stuff. But clearly, Marketo as a software is not going out and bringing you leads. And even website is not typically very helpful either. So we need to actually get down to that channel level when we're trying to understand lead source in a way that is meaningful and that actually helps drive some data-driven decisions. And that can be hard in Marketo. It's certainly doable. Tracking your offers in Marketo is a lot less complex. We all can make a program for a white paper or an ebook, and typically using either the form that the person filled out or the combination of a form and a landing page, we can determine what content they're tracking with. Marketo tracks this out of the box by showing us what page somebody's on and where they filled out a form. So all that data is very easily accessible. But if we want to know, all right, well, what referred somebody to that page, and not even more so to that page, what brought them to our website? So if I search in Google, visit your website, click around 10 pages, then fill out a form, how do you tell me, or how do you tell, more importantly, your CMO or your CEO or your board of directors what brought that person in, and in aggregate, which channels are most effective at bringing people in? This data, if you capture it all in Marketo, is hidden deep in your activity log, and it's very difficult to surface it and bring it into your data model in a way that is easy to report upon. So typically, the way that Marketo users will do this is deploy some kind of custom tracking script that does something very similar to what Google Analytics would do. Look at the UTM parameters that are on your links, look at the referrers that are sending people to your site, store that data in a cookie to make it portable, so that that cookie moves with someone as they go around your website, so that when they do fill out a form, you can bring the information that's in that cookie into some hidden fields, bring it onto the person object, and then you can do different things with it from there and make it reportable. So what I'm showing here, to the extent that it's possible on a screen, is how a script like that might work in creating these hidden fields when this person fills out a form. We've got all these hidden fields, and we're capturing medium and source and campaign and term. So it's entirely doable. We've worked with this many times. I've used script like this in many different projects. There's nothing wrong with it. The challenge is, we'll go on the next slide, that you need to have a reliable script, you need to deploy it, you need to maintain it, and you need to troubleshoot it. And if you are going to go this route, which, as I say, is a perfectly legitimate route to go, the main thing I would urge you to do is find a script or a library that is already created for this purpose, that has been battle tested out in the field, and that is reliable. And ideally, someone can support you if you get it. If you try to create it yourself, even working with somebody who is an experienced developer, you can run into all sorts of issues. Cross-browser compatibility, issues with libraries, race conditions, the list goes on. The example that I'm putting here is from a number of years ago, where we tried to create a script, and through some strange base 64 encoding issue, ended up translating all this data into what appears to be some Asian language, and I don't speak it, so I don't know what it is, but that's what it looks like. And it took a lot of troubleshooting to understand why this was happening sporadically. So save yourself that headache if you do go this route, and use a library. And if there's, if you're looking to do that, there's options out there that I could recommend if you want to contact us. Now, on the next slide, how does this work with Bizible? This is one of the most prominent differences that you'll see if you're making that switch. Bizible has its own JavaScript code. It's quite small and clean, as you can see, and you simply deploy this on all the pages of your website. So you don't have to write your own script, you don't have to maintain it, and you don't have to worry as much about things going wrong, because you've got a vendor that's responsible for it. So that's the nice thing about this. And the other part of it is that this data, in a similar way to Google Analytics, it's not being pushed directly into fields on Marketo when somebody fills a form, but rather it's being stored in Bizible's cloud, and then Bizible will later identify the matching record in your CRM system and push that data there. So it creates a bit of a bridge that is then capable of storing a lot more data in a lot more of a flexible way than a script that simply pushes things into hidden form fields. So a big difference there on the data capture front. The next scenario we want to look at is data modeling, where a lot of the interesting things happen. So in this scenario, we're looking at a multi-channel, multi-offer campaign where you're running a big program across lots of different tactics, and you want to see which channels are driving the most engagement with particular offers. This is a very reasonable, very legitimate question, one that pretty much every client that I've worked with wants to know, and it's surprisingly difficult to answer. We'll show you why. This report there is an example, early example of the Bizible report that Sarah showed you earlier. So why is this difficult to supply? Let's look at it on the next slide. So the first thing to understand when we look at why is that question difficult to answer is to understand where the information is actually being stored. So in Marketo, what I call the unit of attribution is the program, which is roughly analogous to a Salesforce campaign if you use those and sync them together. And the program represents a specific marketing initiative. So everything that you're able to report on when doing attribution with Marketo, traditionally speaking, is based on how you choose to set up your programs. You choose to just set up a program called website, then you'll be able to give attribution at that level. If you choose to, create a program for every single page on your website, which I don't recommend that you do, but if you did, you would be able to give credit on that level, in theory. So everything comes down to how you choose to define and create your programs. Now, if we were trying to answer this question relating offers and channels, there's a few different ways of doing it. Tracking offers and outcomes with Marketo, we pretty much have that down. We create programs for our ebooks, our white papers, our webinars. We add people to them. We're pretty good. Tracking channels, doable, but as we saw, caution is needed and special effort is needed. Tying those things together can be very hard. So the first way of doing that, which you'll see on the next slide, is, again, what I call the traditional way, is just creating separate offers and channels. So you create an offer for your ebook, and then you create an offer for each of the channels that you're interested in, generally speaking. So not specifically tied to that ebook, but just in general. So for Google, for LinkedIn, for Twitter, your paid search. This is pretty simple and pretty easy to do. And assuming that you've got that script deployed, you can detect, the UTM medium field changed to paid search. So I'm going to add somebody to this paid search program. So this gives you a certain level of insight, and in many cases, it's far beyond what many companies are doing today. So I don't mean to knock this, but the type of report that it produces, which we'll see on the next slide, looks something like this. And I give credit to Marketo. This image actually goes way back. It was one that Marketo used a lot in its material back in like 2012. And I included here slightly for a nostalgic effect, but also to illustrate that in a lot of ways, this hasn't changed. This is how, in many ways, you would still be doing attribution using Marketo's tools today. And the limitations, from my perspective, of this report are immediately evident when you start digging down into it and start, trying to actually use it to make decisions. So on the one hand, you're like, wow, look at all this credit that we're giving to marketing. That's great. But on the other hand, it then leads you to ask questions like, so should we double down on our online ad, or should we double down on our website contact us form? And you kind of think, what? Those are two completely separate things. They don't go together at all. And similarly, and so on. A lot of these things, because we're mixing channels and offers together in the same report and in a disconnected way, it's kind of leading us to potentially inaccurate, or at least not being able to answer some of those very important questions. Like, well, what did that online ad lead somebody to fill out that contact us form, or what brought somebody to that free trial? Which types of channels are most likely to get somebody to fill that out, and so on and so forth. The other limitation here is that if someone engages with your pay-per-click program, let's say more than once, only the first instance of that is going to get credit, because you can only be a member of a program or a campaign once. So we're bumping into some limitations of the data model. So let's see how we might get around that in Marketo. On the next slide, this is an alternative that I've used successfully with some clients, whereas you create a program per offer channel combination. So you say, all right, I'm not just going to create a program for my ebook, but I'm going to create one for my ebook, that people that came in from display, people that came in from email, and so on and so forth, as you can see there. So this will get you, if you imagine the report on the previous slide, populated with data from these programs, this will get you that level of insight in terms of seeing how offers and channels connect with each other. So this is taking you a significant distance further in terms of the questions you're able to answer. Of course, the downsides, as you can probably imagine, is that it would take a lot of programs. We have something 50 or 60 channels and subchannels here at Perkuto, and we're not terribly complicated, frankly. There's businesses that could have many more when you really dig down into it. So imagine creating that many programs for every single piece of content, every initiative. That's complicated to do, and it takes a lot of effort and so on and so forth. The other issue potentially is that it can be difficult to assign costs to these different channels because your paid search program may not be neatly divided up across your offers in these ways. So how do you divvy up these costs and calculate ROI? Another channel there. But I would say creating the programs in the first place is probably the most significant obstacle with this approach. And the third approach that you might do, this one would require a CRM as well, in this case Salesforce, but a third approach that is achievable with Marketo and your CRM is to bring that channel data onto the campaign member relating to the offer. So if we remember, a program is a single marketing initiative and a campaign is analogous to it. So a campaign is a single marketing initiative as well. The campaign member then represents the intersection of a specific person and a specific marketing initiative. So in Marketo, we give people a program status. In Salesforce, people have a campaign member status. And the difference with Salesforce is that in Marketo, you can't enrich the program status with any additional metadata or detail, although it's a very popular idea that's in the community, and maybe it'll be possible one day. But right now, you can't do it. In Salesforce, you can add these custom fields here, and you can create some logic to pull that information into Marketo onto person fields, push it into Salesforce, have some Apex logic or process builder that copies it into hidden fields, and you can achieve this, and that will allow you to create a report very similar to the one that we showed that we created with Bizible. So to say that absent a kind of Bizible-like system, this is probably your next best bet. Limitations here still being that you don't have a distinct campaign representing the channel anymore. So for example, your paid search campaign in this instance, if you wanted to calculate ROI, where are you going to post that cost? So it still brings you into a world where you've got to do some wrangling and spreadsheets outside of your system and pulling things together. And that's not the end of the world, but it's extra effort, extra time, delay, less real time, more chance for error, bringing disparate data sets together, so on and so forth. So let's compare and contrast all that, all those different options with the Bizible way of doing things on the next slide. Now, the important thing to understand with Bizible is that the unit of attribution is different. Rather than having something like a campaign or a program or something that represents the marketing initiative, Bizible uses an object called the touchpoint. And the touchpoint represents a specific marketing interaction, similar to the campaign member record that we were just looking at. Now, this is really a game changer when it comes to the flexibility that you have to produce actionable insights in Bizible, because all the information relating to the channel and all the information that you can track relating to the offer are stored as dimensions or metadata on that touch point. So here we can see this particular touch point. This is from Perkuto's own instance. A person came in from LinkedIn. It's being categorized as organic social. We can see the exact post that we were promoting, and then we can see the exact thing that they eventually responded to, which was a guide to GDPR compliance. So they landed on a particular page, and then they navigated, and then they filled it out. So this one touch point is giving us a lot of rich information about that specific marketing interaction that that person had. And you can also see where it was in the journey. So this was the LC, or the lead creation touch, the touch that actually caused the person to become a known record in our database. So although you have a lot here, and this is all tracked automatically, by the way, with that little bit of Bizible JavaScript, so you can see how much firepower you're getting with very little effort. You install that script, you're hitting the ground running and tracking all this out of the box. That's great. Where Marketo users may find that there's a bit of a gap is the amount of information that you're getting about the offer. So we have to intuit from that form URL. All right, they downloaded, the Marketo client's guide to GDPR compliance. But if I want to roll this up by, all right, show me all my guides or all my white papers or all my webinars together, and to bring that together, there isn't that sort of rich metadata about the offer specifically available. So you need to either supplement that with some additional work, custom formula fields, things like that, or find another way around that. So that's a small gap, I would say, but certainly on the whole, the amount of information you're getting and the ratio of value to effort that you have to put in here is vastly different than any of those options that we just looked at before. Additionally, touch points are created sort of endlessly. Every time someone fills out a form, anytime somebody engages in a significant interaction, a new touch point is being created, even if they're clicking on the same paid ad 20 times. Although if they're doing that, that's probably fraud. But you get my point. If they're engaging with the channel multiple times, you get multiple touch points. So a lot of the restrictions, the issues that we were bumping into with the Marketo program or Salesforce campaign-based data model, those issues are kind of going away. So we're enabling a lot of flexibility. And the next slide will just show us what that looks like, all spread out, all these glorious touch points in a row, all that data at your fingertips. So finally, on the next slide, oh, and this also just shows you, by the way, how you would group that together. So again, another view, seeing all these different offers and all these different channels in one report and how they connect to each other. Now, the final thing to talk about, the final scenario, is how do we actually visualize all of that? So we want to ultimately get to these cool reports. And we can't dive into this in too much depth just due to time considerations, but just for a quick overview of how these tools compare, which you'll see on the next slide. Marketo, as we know, has revenue. I'm sorry, I call it Revenue Explorer. I should call it Advanced Report Builder, which is the new term. And they also have MPI, which is a newer reporting tool that really, as far as I can tell, and I'll admit I haven't played with it a ton, but it seems very good at delivering easily digestible insights. So, if you're a CMO or high-level executive dashboards, what are the top channels? What are the top performing programs? Things like that. So it's very good at that. Not as flexible at being able to drill down and do a lot of ad hoc analysis. ARB or RCE does enable a lot of flexibility with doing that sort of ad hoc analysis. But an issue I've often found there is that you're still constrained to a certain degree with how much you can customize it. It's in its own little world. You can't very easily add, complicated custom fields or use Apex logic to enrich that data. It's just sort of off in its own place. And another issue that you may have found if you're using large data sets is that it can be kind of slow. Another challenge that faces both ARB and MPI is that you've got first touch and you've got an even split multi-touch model. So that's good. If you want more flexibility in different types of models, as you can see over on the Bizible side, there's a lot more options, from U-shape to W-shape to custom to machine learning to custom influenced by machine learning. There's a lot of different options, and we can talk about the relative merits of those another time because we don't have time today. And then how you actually look at that data in Bizible is either in your CRM, in that interface, so just using standard CRM reporting engine, Bizible's own interface. So they have a new Discover platform that allows you to look at that information, or all that information is very easily connected to a BI tool, something that's a lot more challenging with the data that's in Marketo. With Bizible, you can easily pull your Salesforce information or your CRM information into a BI tool, or Bizible can actually push directly from its cloud into a BI tool and essentially give you all of the attribution information plus a full clickstream view. So for companies like TIBCO, more analytically mature, they have a lot of very detailed data at their fingertips. So as a stepping stone to, let's say, a full-fledged BI organization, Bizible is a very good intermediate step along the way as well, and one that you can grow with as your needs change. So I think that takes me to the end of the time that I have. Sarah, we'll turn it over to you to wrap up and see if we have any questions.
Great, thank you, Justin. That was an excellent overview of attribution and how the tools compare. And again, to get more information on what Justin just presented, and he has a really nice breakdown of the functional differences between Revenue Explorer and Bizible, please visit learn.perkuto.com/attribution, and you'll find everything that you need there. Okay, as you mentioned, it is time for our question and answer period. Joining Brandon and Justin are Jordan Kahn from Bizible and Frank Passantino from Marketo. So gentlemen, welcome. We have quite a few questions coming in. So let's see. First one is, does TIBCO track revenue by campaign or channel? It seems like with multi-touch revenue could be spread across so many campaigns, and that might be interesting rolled up. So, Brandon, can you give us a little insight on how you are tracking revenue?
Yes, we absolutely do track revenue at the campaign and channel level. We do it in a couple ways, right? Again, Bizible does provide some out of the box reporting, and then we also do have a data warehouse where we pull in, kind of doing some big data type things where we're pulling in a lot of the the data warehouse that Bizible has available. We pull that together and we pull that into another data set where we kind of look at overall ROI, where we can get down to the campaign level, the channel level, the region level, and kind of split it all out that way. That's taken some time, but one of the things that's been interesting in that journey is it's really carved a roadmap into additional things we need to look at and additional action items for some of our website teams. So we do that, and it's we are seeing some interesting results, and it's really helping us really navigate where we go next.
Excellent, thank you. We have another question on creating tracking links. This one is, how do we create tracking links for Marketo or Google Analytics from LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter?
There's a number of different processes that could work for that. A lot of companies just use a Google Sheet. And store their links there, have some kind of system where they have formulas that will concatenate different things. I think the main thing to be aware of is, number one, you need to have your UTM parameters defined across the organization so that everybody knows what needs to be appended to these tracking links in different situations. Have a solution that allows people to create a tracking link with a minimum of fuss and ease, and that prevents errors as much as possible. At Perkuto, we use a tool called Terminus, not the ABM tool. It's another tool, and basically, it's like a fancy Google Sheet, but it lets you just define pick lists of different things and then create tracking links and shorten them. But the main thing is the definition that goes into it, making people aware of it, and then the governance around it. However you then do it, can be flexible. There's no magic bullet, but making sure that it's consistent is important.
That's great. Thank you. And still more questions about codes and links. This one is pertaining to GDPR, so a topic that's top of mind for a lot of marketers. Justin, I know you know the answer. Jordan and Frank, feel free to jump in as well. But how does the tracking code on the landing page work with GDPR compliance?
If that's specific to Bizible, Jordan, maybe you want to tackle that one.
Yeah, I can give the short answer here because it's a whole thing. So Bizible is fully GDPR compliant, and we have mechanisms in place. And I think you also have to do it on the landing page level, like the correct messaging. But there are ways to opt out, access your data, have your data deleted, and all the requirements in GDPR. So we track everything, and then should someone say we don't want you to track, we absolutely stop. So fully GDPR compliant. You can look it up. I think it's bizible.com/GDPR is all of our content related there.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and this is Frank. This is Frank from Marketo. Similarly, we are also fully GDPR compliant. There's plenty of ways to get all your data out of Marketo, whether it's activities or fields, as well as we have the ability to drop opt-out cookies on the browser so that the person is no longer tracked on their website as well. So we have a website too that we can distribute the link for after this webinar.
Great, thank you, Frank. So Jordan, another question. How does the touch point get linked to the opportunity?
So the touch point, as Justin said in the presentation, is kind of our atomic unit. It's the smallest unit. And so it's attached to a person, the Bizible person, which can be a lead or a contact, however you have it set up, in your CRM. And that rolls up to the opportunity. So when that person is connected to an opportunity, the touch points just all roll up and aggregate so that you can slice and dice and analyze all of that touch point data at the opportunity level as well.
Great. Here's a really interesting one that perhaps a couple of you will want to weigh in on, but any recommendations on retroactive marketing attribution, such as going back 3 to 4 years, trying to retroactively put campaigns into programs to establish attribution? Can you do it? How would you do it? What are your thoughts?
My recommendation is not to do it. Unless you absolutely have to. And I mean, it's not the first time I've heard of the desire. Unless you feel that you have an absolute treasure trove of insight that's waiting to emerge that will make, a serious and quantifiable impact on your future business, it's probably not worth the pain and suffering that's involved. You could in theory, like, it depends what data you're starting with, but you could, harvest all the data from your Marketo instance, like yank all the activity logs, work with, qualified BI developer to try to make some sense out of that. That might be a reasonably achievable project, but to actually try to retroactively recreate programs or campaigns or things, it's generally just not worth the effort, which probably hurts a little to hear if you've got a lot of stuff that you wish you could trace back to. But it's a daunting task, is what I would say. Interested in what others think about that, though.
Yeah, this is Jordan from Bizible. I totally agree with you, Justin. Unless you have super immaculate campaigns and programs set up, it's usually not worth the effort, especially if you start to use Bizible as whatever going forward. Just the difference in data quality is going to mess you up.
Maybe I can give a bit of perspective as well. When we initially set up Bizible, this is Brandon speaking here, but when we initially set up Bizible, we had the tool enabled, but we weren't quite ready to use it. So we had about a month of just trying to figure out how we were going to use it, what our strategy was. And over that month, we started to collect a vast amount of information that was so different from what our expectations were that because we were kind of exploring that as well. How do we get some historical data? But just kind of implementing it, maybe giving it a couple of weeks, maybe a month, similar to what we did, you're going to have so much more insight, and that'll really help you define a clearer path forward. Good. That was our experience anyways.
Good. Thank you. Good insights there. Okay, we have another question. So Jordan and Justin, I think, and Brandon, you touched on this a bit, but why should we use Bizible instead of Google 360 and cloud products?
Well, those are really different animals. And I'm not a Google 360 expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I think if you're a B2C business, or if you've got a lot of your data, e-commerce business, you've got a lot of your data that is really needs to be connected to Clickstream, then having Google 360 or that sort of environment be your home base makes a lot of sense. If you're dealing with a lot of information that's already native to the CRM or your marketing automation platform, then that's a place where having something that starts out in Bizible, and in the CRM environment makes a lot of sense. Obviously, you're getting, at the end of the day, to the same destination, whichever way you're going. But I think I would take stock of what questions you're trying to answer, what data sets are most important to you, and what already has most of those. And that'll kind of see which place gets you to your destination with the least amount of trouble.
Good.
Yeah, this is Jordan. Just to add, I think Google 360 is great for B2C businesses versus B2B. I do believe they somewhat recently announced a partnership with Salesforce, but I believe the integration is a one-way integration, so the data isn't passed both ways. I could be wrong, double check that. And then there's just the question of independence with their obvious close ties to AdWords. Whenever you're that closely embedded with one channel, you can kind of start to doubt attribution is supposed to be the referee, kind of this third party mediator between all your channels, because you're ultimately trying to prove the value of each of those channels. So when your attribution is that closely tied to a paid media, it can be tough. Just you're going to get super great data in your attribution from AdWords and maybe not the same quality data from your other channels.
Good. Okay, we're going to go with one last question because we're out of time. If you didn't get your question answered, in just a moment, I'll share contact information, and feel free to reach out to Justin or Brandon and ask them directly your question, and they will do their best to provide the answer to you. But our closing question is, how do you know if you have the right data sophistication or maturity for Bizible?
Yeah, I can at least take the lead on this one. So Bizible obviously does take some degree of sophistication. You need to get that JavaScript on there. You have to understand what the data means. But I think Brandon did an excellent job in his presentation of kind of the crawl, walk, run kind of framework of thinking about how to adopt Bizible. There are tons of great reports that Bizible provides out of the box. And then additional things like the custom model, which takes more sophistication, obviously. You do not need a data scientist. You don't need a whole team of analysts to get value out of Bizible. Obviously, they will help you get more value. So I'd say, I mean, we have companies that are 100 people and 5 marketing people successfully using Bizible and getting a ton of value. So some things that kind of correlate with getting value out of Bizible is obviously paid media, like an investment there, valuing it, a marketing ops person, or some marketing ops functionality in your team, and then just using multiple channels. So if you only have one channel, you're going to allocate money there, and there's not a ton of decision. But if you have dozens, Bizible will provide a lot of value there.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to say the same thing. Multiple channels and a level of process sophistication. I don't think technical sophistication is really a barrier, but if you can't get your team, to use consistent UTM parameters, for example, you might have trouble. But if you have those things in place, then I think you could benefit from Bizible out of the gate.
Very good. Brandon, anything you want to add?
No, I mean, I guess the last thing I'd add is you kind of, for us anyways, the organization sort of dictated when we were ready for Bizible. Had we come in on day one and tried to, look at multi-touch and all that stuff, it would have been paralysis by analysis. The organization has to mature and has to be ready. TIBCO is a big organization, but we were very, very immature in the beginning. And again, as we started to mature, the questions became more complex, and it really dictated the path forward. And Bizible was just an easy choice from there.
Great. Frank, anything to add?
Yeah, I would just say that I think a good way to think about it is a lot of times when customers are starting to ask questions that they can no longer answer with the Marketo attribution reporting, that's typically a good sign that you're ready for something like Bizible. So once you get to that level of maturity, it's almost like you'll know because you won't be able to answer some of the questions that you're asking. Great.
Excellent. Well, gentlemen, thank you. Thank you for jumping on today and providing excellent information. And thank you to our audience for giving us an hour of your time. We don't take that lightly, so thank you very much. Please be watching for an email, which will have a link to download the slides as well as an on-demand version in case you want to share this with your colleagues. On the screen, you can see that we've got Justin and Brandon's contact information there. So if you did not get your question answered, please feel free to reach out to them, or we do have an exit poll, and I believe there's a open-ended spot that you can also type in comments back to us. But thank you very much. This concludes our webinar, and I hope everybody has a great day.